Hello. Welcome. My name's Ethan Wrenn. Make sure to check out my website, ethanwrenn.com, there you can find links to all my various socials. We're currently live on Twitch and YouTube and the front page of my website. Make sure to follow and subscribe if you'd like to get notified when we go live next. On my website, I have a blog. It's pretty cool. I put a lot of work into it, so I'd really appreciate if you guys go check it out. I'm constantly updating it with new information and new articles. You can use this to help better your trading. There's information pertaining to stocks, ETF, but also fun things like gaming and emulation. These are all different things you could look into. There's even videos for almost every post that we make. So I'd highly recommend if you look through that. Also, you have access to my Discord publicly. You don't even need an account. You could just click the little Discord button in the bottom. You could see every single category from here. You want to see what we're buying? Just click the bullish charts channel. Boom. You got pictures and everything. Yeah, everything you need to be a proficient trader. You don't even need to make an account, guys. So check that out. What are we going to be looking into today? We're going to be looking at the debt ceiling standoff of 2021, what it means for investors from the official TD Ameritrade account. Why are we watching this? Well, here we are in 2023, and the past 2 weeks of the news cycle has been, oh my gosh, the debt ceiling standoff. Well, let's see if I could pull up some information about this. But it seems to be a really topical thing right now. Everyone's talking about the debt ceiling, the debt ceiling, the debt ceiling. Here's CNBC yesterday. Biden and McCarthy to meet at White House on Monday to try and avoid looming debt default. Hard choices will need to be made about bills that go unpaid if the debt ceiling is not raised. It's been like this for like 2 weeks, guys. It's been like this for 2 weeks. Now, apparently this happens often, right? Everyone's trying to pretend like this is a whole new thing. This is a whole new concept. Like the government's never done this before. Here's a video from 2021. This happens almost every year. Like this happens all the time. Like this is a very normal thing. Like nobody should be surprised by this. Nobody should be fearful of these headlines. Like they use this as like a lever to push the market back and forth, and they just kind of prolong this decision as much as possible. As long as the headline being pumped out by CNBC regarding the debt ceiling is pushing the market in the direction they want it to go, they'll just let that shit keep running. But let's learn more about it because it seems to be so topical.
Debt ceiling headlines give you a strong sense of deja vu. You're not crazy. Every few years since...
Thank you, lady, for telling me I'm not crazy for being apparently the only one that remembers the debt ceiling and every conversation and opinion that could have ever been had about it already having been had. Talking about it like it's a new concept, like this is a threat to our economy. Like if we don't do something, like... It's like an imaginary problem. It's like a...
You're not crazy.
Thank you, lady. I just needed to hear it from this lady.
Every few years since 2011, the U.S. government has come to the brink of defaulting on its obligations.
Every year since 2011. Like...
which many experts argue could have dire consequences for the U.S. economy and financial markets. While the United States has yet to actually default, the brinkmanship can still cause market turmoil. To help make sense of the situation, let's look...
Almost intentionally so, by design, just so they can act like they have some sort of like control here, or like, you gotta listen, we might not increase the debt,
Look at what the debt ceiling is.
Intentionally trying to like create confusion.
Individual investors. From Social Security to the military to Medicaid, the U.S. government has a lot of expenses. Taxes help pay for much of these costs, but that revenue isn't enough. So the government issues debt. However, in 1939, Congress passed a law limiting how...
So you might be... the government makes money on taxes, right? But apparently taxes are not enough to cover their expenses. So what do? They issue bonds. Yes, war bonds, treasury bonds. This is the other vehicle on how governments, pay for their activities, right? And in exchange for you loaning them money, they give you that interest rate back.
Much debt the government can take on. That limit is known as the debt ceiling or debt limit.
So again, the idea of a debt ceiling is a relatively common idea. Every year the government has expenses, right? And the debt ceiling was put into place to basically act as a checks and balance on future government officials, right? Many years ago, they put this idea of a debt ceiling in place to act as a check and balance on future congressmen, future senators, future presidents, to make sure that their spending does not get out of hand. That is basically the core concept behind the debt ceiling. They put in place this limit, this imaginary limit on how much money that the government is allowed to spend a long time ago, so that future legal government political representatives, kind of have to stop and ask themselves, like, how are we doing with our spending? Are we spending too much? Are we spending too little? It basically acts as a check and balance on government spending. That's all it is. That's all it is. And believe me, when they put in place a debt ceiling, they know for a fact that they're going to hit it one day and exceed it. They know for a fact they're going to lift it one day. It's kind of like a checkpoint for the U.S. government. They put in place this imaginary ceiling, like, when you get there, you all need to stop and sit back and be like, are we spending too much on military? Are we spending too much on Medicare? Is everything going okay? That's basically what it is. The United States is one of only 2 countries, I believe, in the world that have this concept of a debt ceiling, while every other country just kind of gradually, spends as they spend. If you're to take away anything from this video, take away the concept that a debt ceiling is basically a check and balance on future political officials to make sure that they're not spending too much. And debt ceilings are supposed to be hit, and when they get hit, they get lifted.
As government spending has increased, Congress has raised or suspended the debt ceiling 98 times to allow the government.
Now listen to that. She said Congress has raised the debt ceiling over 90 times. Our country, it really isn't that old when you think about it. 90 times. So when we're getting all these headlines from CNBC saying hard choices will need to be made on which bills go unpaid if the debt ceiling isn't raised, all they're doing is fear mongering. If you had to bet money on whether the debt ceiling is going to get raised or not raised, you take the bet that it's going to get raised every time. This headline should only sway or make an investor feel some type of way if they're 16-year-olds and just started investing 6 months ago, because this is a non-issue. It is a non-starter. With the debt ceiling, it inevitably gets raised every time, and that's kind of what it's supposed to do by design in a way. If I was in charge, if I was part of Congress and I was making legislation on these topics, yes, debt ceilings are good. We're going to raise the debt ceiling, but we should also consider lowering our spending. It takes both of these in practice. And that's why the debt ceiling is in place, right? Every time that our country hits the debt ceiling, it's supposed to act as like a checkpoint, like a pause, to be like, how's our spending going? Is there maybe ways we can reduce spending a little bit? We're going to raise the debt ceiling, but maybe we should consider ways to reduce spending a little bit. That's all it is. It's a check and balance, just so the government kind of knows, how much they're their spending. And again, they're one of only 2 governments, I believe, in the world, give or take, that have a debt ceiling policy, while everyone else just kind of lets it go.
Government to keep borrowing. However, what was once a routine procedure has become more tense. In 2019, Congress suspended the debt ceiling, allowing debt to continue to grow until a certain date. That suspension ended in July 2021. So here we are again, needing Congress to raise or suspend the debt ceiling. So what could happen if Congress doesn't find a solution, and how could it impact retail investors? The biggest risk is that the United States could default on its debts. Experts estimate that the Treasury could run out of money.
Now, she's talking about the risks of not raising the debt ceiling, but the United States government is never going to be in a position where they're not raising the debt ceiling. Just understand that. They've lifted it 90 times in the past. It's inevitable. It happens. There isn't even another choice. Our government doesn't have any other option other than raising the debt ceiling. That part's for certain. The only other added part is, again, it's a check and balance. This is time for our government, not us, the government, to sit back and be like, maybe we can reduce spending in a few key areas so that next time we're having this debt ceiling, it's maybe an extra 6 months out instead of being exactly next year.
Money sometime in mid to late October if a deal isn't reached. In addition to impacts on individuals, like cutting off benefits for seniors or paychecks for soldiers, default could leave the United States unable to pay interest and maturities on treasuries. U.S. government debt is the leading safe asset for international investment, so a default would likely disrupt capital markets in the United States and across the world. In a September 19th Wall Street Journal article, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said, failing to raise the debt limit would produce widespread economic catastrophe and likely precipitate a historic financial crisis. Potential results could include a sell-off in treasuries, which could drive up interest rates, making it more expensive for government, businesses, and consumers to borrow money. Investors might lose confidence in the dollar as well, increasing inflation.
Well, the value of the dollar is definitely going to tank. I'd hate to burst y'all bubble here, but the value of the dollar is just definitely going down regardless over the next year or so. So keep that in mind. But all of this does kind of, again, when you think of an asset that represents a government, the first thing you think of is its currency, right? So when you have these talks of a government, oh my gosh, what if they default? Like that negative fear, that negative fear mongering should really precipitate in things like the U.S. dollar, which should drive the U.S. value of the U.S. dollar down, right?
Inflation. Stocks could also sell off due to distorted valuations, lower consumer spending, and expensive margin trading. While no one is sure what would happen, it could be fateful to find out. Fortunately, a default is unlikely, despite
the default is extremely unlikely. Again, they've lifted this 90 times in the past. It's inevitable. It's basically a non-starter. I can't believe this has been the entire headlines for over like 2 weeks now, that them just talking about this debt ceiling thing. They're going to raise the debt ceiling, and they're going to potentially, I would recommend that they potentially look at ways to reduce their rate of spending moving forward. It's, again, a check and balance that the government uses on future political officials, congressmen, senators, presidents, etc., just to make sure that things don't get too out of hand without it just being looked at.
Anxiety being high. Even though we've come to the brink before, Congress has always managed to raise or modify the debt ceiling. But that doesn't mean there's no risk for investors. In the short term, uncertainty over whether Congress will act to raise or suspend the debt ceiling.
I would argue there is absolutely zero risk associated with the whole debt ceiling thing because we already know the outcome. The only thing that this does is what she's saying, right? This whole hysteria of this back and forth, the headline being debt ceiling, debt ceiling, debt ceiling for 2 weeks is this.
Congress will act to raise or suspend the debt ceiling could spark uncertainty over whether Congress will act to raise or suspend the debt ceiling could spark volatility. Uncertainty over whether Congress will act to raise or suspend the debt ceiling could spark volatility.
Which in itself makes the headline itself the problem. Which in itself just shows the only thing about the headline, them running that for 2 weeks straight, that's the problem. An attempt to spark uncertainty over this extremely certain and non-trivial problem, that's the problem.
In 2011, Congress waited until the last moment to avoid default, leading to volatility spikes in stock and bond markets. The crisis peaked when Standard & Poor's downgraded the U.S. credit rating for the first time ever, leading to one of the most volatile weeks in the market's history. Market unrest was a factor in finally pushing Congress to act just days before the country went into default. While subsequent standoffs were less eventful, this time around, investors may want to prepare for volatility as the deadline nears. For long-term investors, make sure your portfolio is diversified in line with your current risk tolerance and investment objectives. You may also want to explore ways of hedging your portfolio to help manage risk. More active traders should monitor their positions and be on the lookout for opportunities and risks from high volatility. Either way, stay focused on your goals.
Yep, stay focused on your goals, chat. You set a plan, you stick to that plan, discipline, you exercise discipline, you set a plan, you stick to your plan. That was a great video from TD Ameritrade. We're going to get into a few more before that. I'm going to take a tiny break, so I'll be right back, guys.